When I was in college, I went on a service trip to, of all places, Miami Beach, Florida. So we did some work with Habitat for Humanity while we were down there. On the way to the building site that we were working on, one morning I was engaging with another student, a female student named April, who was on the trip. And April and I were just having a conversation. She was kind of leaning over the row of seats in front of me with her elbow propped up, just having a conversation. And as we're talking, suddenly April begins to look past me and out the window, and then she let out this ear-splitting scream. I couldn't figure out what was wrong with April. April then went to the window of the van that we were in, and she pressed her hands up against the glass and continued to scream, because there was a scene unfolding in front of her. This is Miami Beach. There were 6 young men, shirtless, in white pants, standing in the median of the road. These gentlemen were probably in the range of about 2 to 3% body fat, hair perfectly coiffed. I assume they were coming from or going to a photo shoot. And as they crossed the street and as we were passing by, I caught the eye of one of these young men who I perceived constantly had this expression on his face. Yes. Yes, I really am a big deal. Yes, I am a model in Miami Beach only wearing white pants. Yes, I am creating a scene. You have heard it said that it is nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. I am here to tell you today that it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be handsome. Our text says today, the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks upon the heart. That's kind of the eye-catching phrase in 1 Samuel 16 for most people. It's likely the thing that caught your ear as you heard the text being read today. The Lord looks on the heart. That may be reassuring for some of us. God doesn't have the same blind spots as people do, which would be really nice. Except King David is being lined up as a successor to King Saul, who, when he was selected as the first king of Israel by the same prophet, and we assume the same God, it was all the way back in 1 Samuel chapter 10, 6 whole chapters ago, where we hear when Saul took his stand among the people, he was head and shoulders taller than any of them. Samuel said to all the people, "Do you see the one that the Lord has chosen? There is none like him among all the people." And all the people shouted, "Long live the king. Long live this tall, handsome man." Clearly, Samuel and God have learned their lesson, right? Saul has proven over the course of the last 6 chapters to be a tiresome leader who doesn't listen, who is asked to behave a certain way even in battle, and he doesn't listen at all. He takes his enemies' cattle for himself. He spoils the land. He shows no mercy. And as Israel transitions from the period of the judges to the period of the kings about 3,000 years ago, Saul, the first king, is a king that needs replacing. Israel wished that they had thought of term limits. So they need someone new. And here we have Samuel approaching Bethlehem as the kingmaker, and the people of Bethlehem know that Samuel, the prophet, has come to take something or someone. And Samuel now sees Jesse's kids. And the first boy comes along, Eliab. And after all that Saul has done, and after all Samuel and God together have been through, they see the first son, and Samuel says, "Wow, this is a good-looking kid right here. 3% body fat, white pants, Miami Beach. This kind of guy is right here in front of me. Look, this has got to be the chosen one." the Lord looks on the heart. And so they go through these 7 boys, and finally they get to the 8th, who's out in the field, smelly shepherd boy David. They bring him in. And the text ought to now say, right, because the Lord looks upon the heart, that at his anointing, obviously, young King David is really smart, or he's a great musician, or he's an orator, or he is wise beyond his years. But after all of this, what do we hear about David? Ooh, he's so handsome. He's ruddy. What? I am so confused. I know we shouldn't be looking at outward appearances, but gosh, this is a good-looking kid. The text can't help itself. It demands that as human beings hear this story, that for a new king being brought forth, there needs to be a new way of seeing him positively. True, he's not tall, but look at him. It's hard for any of these guys to be humble. Saul and David, they have, at least for a while, God on their side. For great periods of their lives, things go swimmingly, and they're good looking. Sometimes people in church will wonder why we bother with readings from the Hebrew Bible, from the Old Testament. It's hardly a treatise on perfection. It's so human. God appears to be strangely flawed at times. People will say, I don't like the God of the Old Testament. But the Hebrew Bible is a rich, rich treasure trove of stories and narratives of human beings evolving in their understanding of who God is and what they are to do with worship and praise with respect to that God. And here now we find Samuel and David, and by extension Saul, kings and prophets, the powerful reckoning with God, and the arc of their stories asks a deep underlying question. Will someone who has it all, who has looks and power and fame, also have the capacity to be humble? Humility is not just about thinking of yourself too much or preventing against yourself thinking of yourself too much. Humility, it would seem, according to the text, is also candid self-appraisal, a willingness to accept that not all truth flows from our own souls. Humility is a lack of concern for our own glory and status, which is bound up in our status as a child of God, and an awareness of our own limits. You can't separate these. Commitment to your status as a child of God gives rise to the awareness of your limits. And an awareness of your limits paves the way for following the ethics of Jesus towards God's will being done on earth. I worry about the state of humility today. For humility has the capacity to reset the system so that the preoccupation with being good enough for strangers is not the force that drives us to act in the world. And therefore, we have, with humility, allowed ourselves the opportunity to present ourselves in prayer to God, present and ready to listen. Humility is not the same as saying flippantly, only God can judge me, nor is it a suggestion that we should erode our boundaries. It is the belief that I can do many things to improve myself, be myself, protect myself, help myself, control myself, and also I can't do it all myself. And if I can't do it all myself, then humility is necessarily connected to contrition. The only way to help myself, control myself, protect myself, be myself, improve myself is to acknowledge in rigorous self-assessment that mistakes have been made, and yes, indeed, they have been made by me. This is fundamentally why the narrative that plays between Saul and David takes up so much space in the Hebrew Bible. Because we come to understand that this is the way that David will be marked as different from Saul. Both foul up beyond belief. It is hard to believe that any of us, if we are being sincere with ourselves, would actually believe that we could be or would be in relationship with David after what he does to Uriah. Do you remember that story? David sees a beautiful woman, Bathsheba, and decides that he's going to take her. He learns that she's married, and then he uses the situation to have her husband killed. The thought of admiring David, my own namesake, really want to ask my parents about that sometime. The thought of admiring David makes my skin crawl. But the text doesn't need you to like him. Perhaps it's even understood that you won't like him. What the text does want you to know is that God completely irrationally and unfairly sticks with David as he says aloud, I have sinned. The text also wants you to know that Saul in this story also says, I have sinned. But Saul is brutal, he is cynical, and he is oppressive. And Saul's undoing is that he says those words, I have sinned, and then a minute later, he is back to his old behavior. The text, the big arc of the story, the grand story, is that the righteous king is humble enough to plead for forgiveness. The righteous king is humble enough to be contrite. The righteous king is humble enough to be candid in his self-assessment. The righteous king actually makes an attempt to change. The righteous king does not lash out and say, only God can judge me. But the other thing that the text does in describing David's face, that handsome, ruddy boy, is it literally puts a face on humility and contrition and outrageous acts of sin. Sure, you can't know David, but the authors know that with no description of him and his face and his body, no description of him at all, it becomes enormously difficult for human beings to imagine how to now incorporate that sense of contrition into their own lives. You need the face in order to understand your place in the story. And that's what it is to be human. We have to have a face to begin to understand a problem or a situation or an issue. I can talk all day long about praying for refugees. And I can critique people for doing this or not doing that, for speaking this way or not speaking that way. But it is totally different when you see a 3-year-old kid washed up on a beach in Greece. It is totally different when Samira in Patterson tells me that the kids can't sleep because of the mice and the roaches. Or one of the Ibram children, like Aisha, says school is hard because learning English is hard. Or their friend Yusuf tells me about making it out of Syria and getting to Lebanon, to then go to Moscow, to then go to Havana, Cuba, and sit there for months on end to finally come to Elizabeth, New Jersey, of all places. We form positions on policy for Israel and Palestine without ever talking to a Jew. We tell people in Indiana and Wisconsin and Kansas what's best for them. We discuss where kids in schools should be able to go to the bathroom, as if that runs the gamut, the full depth of the conversation over what it's like to be a transgendered child in America. To be humble in America in 2017 surely means that we have the capacity to rigorously assess where we need to grow, how we need to grow, and who we need to get to know before we pontificate, preach, and proselytize. And sure, a face doesn't always become the balm to soothe all ills. But we have got to stop praying just for the poor and start praying for Mike or Lucy or Pete or your cousin or your brother or yourself. We've got to stop talking about Newark or Patterson or any other community that seems different and pray for the man that you know who is launching a business for the first time, or finding the micro stories and then celebrating the heck out of them. Faceless communities are merely things to debate, and often debate incorrectly. Faceless communities are balls to be juggled, things to be used, plates that need spinning, places that need stuff, our stuff, we might assume. But it always looks different when you have a face. It's a heck of a lot harder to scapegoat a group for all of society's ills when you have a face. Because there is something worth seeing in Patterson and Newark. And there is something worthy and worth seeing in your neighbor. And there is something worth seeing in that guy laying on his horn at a traffic light that says no turn on red, but he can't see the no turn on red sign because he's right up behind you. So he thinks you're an idiot for not turning, and as he lays on his horn, you can see his hand waving up and down and his face contorted in rage at you through the rearview mirror. Not that this has happened to me recently or anything. It takes an act of humility to remember that that man has something worthy to share and to offer this world. And rather than insisting that he do something or be something, this is when we need our humility to do the talking. I'm a child of God, and so is he, a irascible pain in the neck that he is. Forgive me, forgive us all, for we know not what we do. Ours is now our Lenten journey toward Easter. May we see communities of faces and names as stories, not faceless communities that are our pawns in our own game of what's right and wrong with the world today. Grant us, Holy God, the humility to be contrite, to rely upon you in acceptance that we do not have all the answers, and only you, O God, can direct our paths to the ways of justice and peace. Peace be with you.